On April 29, 2025, just outside Brewton, Minnesota, the weather was clear, dry, and perfect for fieldwork. On a farm along Country Road 201 in North Fork Township, a man named Eric Scoot Sager was planting corn. He was using a John Deere DB66 corn planter, basically a wide, heavy, hydraulic-powered machine designed to fold inward for road travel. After finishing a section of the field, Eric stopped to fold the planter so it could be moved to the next plot. But something wasn't working. One of the folding wings wasn't rising properly. Hydraulic systems like this use high-pressure fluid to raise and hold enormous steel arms weighing about a few thousand pounds. And if anything goes wrong, like a leak, a blocked valve, a kinked line, the arm will not move. So the safest thing to do in this situation is to shut down everything and inspect it, and that's what Eric did. He crouched down beneath the towering frame of the planter to check for leaks or damage. The wing's arms, still elevated, loomed directly above him. The system was holding and there was no noise or no warning. Not a single hiss or groan, just the hum of wind through the tiled rows. And then, without a sound, it fell. The left wing, several tons of solid steel, would collapse straight down. In less than a second, it landed directly across Eric's chest and abdomen. The crushing force was absolute. There was no give, no delay, or no struggle. Just an impact like a car crash delivered by gravity in steel. The machine didn't bounce or stop halfway, it just simply settled on top of him and stayed there. His chest caved in instantly, his ribs cracked and snapped inward like dry sticks, with his sternum splintered. The force crushed his lungs flat and compressed his diaphragm so violently that the air shot out of his mouth in a final, involuntary exhale. His spine compressed with a sharp crack, and internally, the trauma was catastrophic. His liver was torn, his intestines burst in several places, and major blood vessels would rupture. His stomach, pancreas, and kidneys were flattened beneath the planter and the earth beneath him. But he was still alive. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face was twisted with blood rising in his throat. His hands spasmed, his legs twitched against the ground with the sheer pressure from the machine, paralyzing him and would seal off most external bleeding. The weight of the machine created a horrifying effect. It crushed him so thoroughly that the massive bleeding stayed contained within his torso, trapped in a body that was now essentially shut off by the steel. His coworker, who had been standing nearby, stood frozen for a second, then bolted toward the machine. He yelled Eric's name, no response, and then he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, yelling into the speaker that the planter had fallen on someone. Then the dispatcher sent emergency services from the Stearns County Sheriff's Office, the Brewton Fire Department, and a LifeLink Air ambulance. It was about 5:47 p.m. when that call came through. As Eric lay trapped, his body continued to betray him. Blood pooled in his abdomen cavity, and the vessels that weren't already ruptured began to tear under the rising internal pressure. The weight of this machine had turned his circulatory system into a sealed bomb, one that hadn't exploded yet, but would. His lungs, already collapsed, began filling with blood. His eyes rose slightly and the vessels in his face began to burst, creating purple bruising and red speckling across his eyes and cheeks. When responders would eventually arrive, minutes later, they found Eric completely pinned. He wasn't speaking and his body was slightly convulsing. He was still conscious, and because of that, they acted fast, deploying hydraulic jacks and stabilizing equipment to lift the planter. They wedged blocks underneath, adjusted the position, and slowly raised the steel wing off his body. As soon as this pressure lifted, everything would go wrong. What had been holding his body together was now gone, and instantly the ruptured vessels let loose. Blood flooded his chest. The damaged organs, now able to expand again, began to fail in rapid succession. His heart, no longer compressed, started beating erratically, trying to compensate. But the blood loss was massive. Several liters spilled into his torso in seconds. His lungs tried to reinflate, but one had been torn open and air hissed out with a wet bubbling sound. Paramedics placed him on the ground and began CPR. They attempted to ventilate him, but blood poured from his mouth. His eyes were wide but unresponsive. One EMT placed pads on his chest and shocked him, Nothing. Another tried to find a pulse in his neck, but it was gone. His skin was molted, already turning gray-blue. His chest cavity had collapsed inward. His abdomen was described gelatinous to the touch, from the organs having been liquefied from the downward pressure. One responder described it as a bag of bones floating in soup. Despite their efforts, Eric was pronounced dead at the scene. It took less than 5 minutes from the moment the machine collapsed to the moment his heart stopped. 5 minutes of brutal, silent suffering. He couldn't cry out, he couldn't even move, he couldn't escape, and he was awake, aware, and being crushed alive by a machine he had trusted. It was quick but not instant, painful but quiet. A kill by pressure, silence, and weight. No foul play was suspected, and the machinery had not been locked out. No support blocks were in place, and the hydraulic system failed. And the planter did exactly what every piece of heavy equipment does when it loses pressure. It dropped, and it would drop on Eric Scott's cigar. At 6:57 a.m. on January 14th, 2019, a neighbor stepped outside their home on Maple Street in Newport, New Hampshire. The temperature was -8 Fahrenheit, with snow hardened into packed ice, and the sky was beginning to lighten, but the sun hadn't fully risen. The street was silent as the neighbors stepped onto their porch. As they did this, they noticed something across the street. On the front steps of another small house, a small, unmoving shape. It was like a bundle of clothes at first, something someone might have left out overnight. But it didn't shift in the wind or look like a pile of fabric. Curious and confused, the neighbor walked closer, discovering it was a child. She was lying sideways on the steps, curled slightly as if asleep. She had no coat, no shoes, and thin pajamas clung to her small frame, stiff from the cold. Her feet were bare, stuck to the ice-covered concrete. Her lips were nearly black, her fingers were curled into frozen claws, and her skin was pale, bluish-gray with patches of frost along her cheeks. Her mouth was partially open, and her hair had frozen solid against the step. She wasn't breathing, her limbs were stiff, and her face rigid. The neighbor immediately called 911, and emergency services responded within minutes. Police, firefighters, and paramedics would arrive, and they pulled her body from the step where it had partially frozen. Paramedics tried to resuscitate her. They wrapped her in warming blankets, attempted CPR, pumped oxygen, and checked for any sign of a pulse. But, not surprising, there was nothing. Her core body temperature was too low to register. She was transported to the hospital where they attempted to revive her again, but she was declared dead shortly after. Her name was Sophia Van Schul, and she was only 2.5 years old. But before all this, Sophia had just moved into the Maple Street home with her mother and siblings. The house was old, the kind with worn fixtures and aging doors. The front door had a basic knob and a latch mechanism, but no deadbolt or child-proof lock. What no one realized until it was too late, that the latch often failed to engage unless someone pulled the door tightly and manually locked it. If left unchecked, the door would appear shut, but could easily swing open from the inside. That night, Sophia went to bed like any other. She wore footless cotton pajamas, and her mother said goodnight, tucked her in, and later went to sleep herself. The heating was on and the other children were asleep, so everything seemed normal. But at some point between 3:30 and 4 a.m., Sophia had gotten out of bed and wandered to the front door. Why she did so remains unknown. Maybe she was confused after the recent move, or maybe she was looking for a parent. But when she pushed the door, it opened. The cold hit her instantly. Wind tore through the doorway and Sophia stepped onto the porch in just her pajamas. The door swung shut behind her, and because of the faulty latch, it sealed from the outside, so she couldn't open it again, meaning she was basically locked out. Within minutes, her small body began to shut down. Skin freezes quickly at -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Her fingers and toes would have gone numb and then stiff. Her ears and cheeks began to frost, and she may have knocked out, or she may have cried. Something that actually supports this is a neighbor reported hearing what sounded like a child crying faintly around 4 a.m. But no one went to check, and the sound didn't actually last for a while, so they probably just forgot about it. Sophia eventually sat or collapsed on the steps. Her body, now failing to shiver, was entering the final stages of hypothermia. Her lips darkened, her skin turned gray-blue, and her hair froze against the cement. Her feet froze in place, her breathing slowed, and her limbs stiffened. Her hands curled in on themselves like frozen claws. Her last breath likely escaped without a sound. When she was found hours later, her body was so cold that paramedics couldn't get a temperature reading. Basically, she had frozen in place. Her body had to be pulled from the concrete. The damage was so severe her hair tore as it was unstuck from the step. Now, I'm going to say what most of you are thinking. Why would a 2.5-year-old kid decide to get out of her bed and then walk towards the front door, and then walk out of it, out of all places in this house? Well, I don't know, nor does the police know. The police first thought the woman was lying because why wouldn't she at least check the front door to make sure it was locked, as she had been living in the house for a couple of days, and it just didn't make sense for the kid just to walk out the door. But there was no history of any type of abuse in this house, and the mother really did look like she was distraught, and there was really no hard evidence of her doing anything. Another possibility, at least I was thinking, was since the door wasn't fully latched, walked in, grabbed the girl, and put her out there. But no, as the door couldn't be pushed from the outside, only from the inside. Also, there was no forced entries, nothing like that in the house. So to this day, we really don't know what made Sophia walk out of her house in the middle of the night and into the cold, leading to her death. It was July 6, 2003. The Santa Monica Farmers Market on Arizona Avenue had been operating since morning, with vendors lining both sides of the street between 4th and 2nd. The market, held weekly, attracted thousands of shoppers. Dozens of tents covered the sidewalks and asphalt. Shoppers browsed in close quarters, families with children, elderly couples walking slowly, and people carrying fresh produce and flowers in canvas bags. The street had been officially closed to vehicle traffic for the market. Traffic barriers, signs, and cones were placed at each entrance. Around 1:45 p.m., a silver 1992 Buick approached from the east, driven by George Russell Weller, age 86. Weller's driving record included only minor infractions. He was alone, and his car moved through the intersection of 4th and Arizona with no indication of stopping. Witnesses said he appeared calm, looking forward. The vehicle bypassed the barriers, entering the restricted pedestrian zone without slowing. The car struck the first people within seconds of entering the market. There was no honking, no braking, and the vehicle accelerated. Witnesses recalled a sudden violent sound as metal slamming into flesh, bodies thudding against the hood. One man was hit head-on and thrown 20 feet, landing on his neck. A woman carrying a toddler was struck mid-stride. Her body was lifted onto the windshield while the child flew from her arms and hit the pavement head first. The car rolled over a man pushing a cart, crushing his chest with his ribs broken inward and puncturing his lungs. The Buick would continue forward, moving through the crowd at 50 to 60 miles per hour. People would obviously scream and scatter. Some were dragged under the wheels, and others were thrown aside like loose mannequins. Vendor tables shattered on impact, and wooden crates exploded under the car. One elderly woman was hit, flipped over the hood, then slammed onto the street as the car kept going, with her skull cracking open on the asphalt. A man walking beside her tried to grab her arm in time, but he was caught by the bumper and pulled underneath. Fruits, vegetables, and human remains mixed into the street. Blood streaked in long lines behind the tires. A woman crouching next to her stall was hit directly in the back. Her spine fractured and she was thrown against a tent pole. One child was hit and crushed entirely under the front wheel. His body was later found nearly severed at the torso. One leg had detached entirely and was located several feet away. The car traveled through nearly 2.5 blocks of the market before finally coming to a stop near 2nd Street. But behind him, the street was littered with debris, splintered wood, scattered produce, overturned strollers, shoes without owners, purses, blood, and pieces of clothing. Bystanders would naturally scream and sob. Some attempted resuscitation on the victims, pressing on collapsed chests and performing CPR through broken jaws and gurgling wounds. Others stood in shock, their faces and clothes splattered with blood. One vendor described hearing a cracking sound and turning to see someone's arm folding completely backward. Emergency services were dispatched immediately. Police and firefighters arrived within minutes and began to help. 9 people had suffered fatal injuries. Dozens more were scattered across the street, moving or unconscious, bleeding from open fractures or deep abdominal lacerations. Some had compound fractures with bones protruding through the skin. Several people were pinned beneath vendor structures, with one woman, having been said earlier, had been thrown into a metal pole, being impaled through her lower chest. A 3-year-old boy was found face down near the curb. He had been struck earlier in the vehicle's path. A medical examiner later confirmed his neck had been broken on impact. His mother was also struck and died at the scene. Paramedics attempted to stabilize some of the victims, but many had suffered trauma incompatible with life. Crushed skulls, multiple organ ruptures, or internal decapitation. George Weller remained in the driver's seat when officers reached the car. He was conscious and did not appear physically injured. When questioned, he stated he had confused the accelerator with the brake. He told officers that he couldn't stop, but he was removed from the vehicle and taken into custody. The car was impounded and examined by forensic investigators, but no surprise, no mechanical failures were ever found. The accelerator, brake system, and steering were fully functional. The tires bore streaks of blood and fabric. Pieces of clothing and tissue were lodged under the chassis. Impact marks and blood splattered on the windshield and hood matched the trajectory of the bodies. The investigation confirmed that the car had entered the pedestrian area and traveled 1,000 feet, hitting at least 63 people, with 9 being killed. Their injuries included full-body crush trauma, open skull fractures, massive internal bleeding, and decapitation by impact. Among the dead were a toddler, several elderly victims, and multiple market regulars. Over 50 people were injured, some critically. Many required surgeries, amputations, or long physical therapy, with several survivors sustaining permanent brain damage. In 2004, Weller was charged with 9 counts, vehicular manslaughter with gross negligence. At his 2006 trial, prosecutors argued that he had multiple opportunities to stop the car, which he obviously did. Expert witnesses testified that his foot had remained on the accelerator the entire time. Weller actually never applied the brakes. His path through the market had been straight and deliberate, without any indication of distress or loss of consciousness. He had driven directly over victims without attempting to swerve or avoid them. He did not testify at the trial, and the jury was shown autopsy photos, surveillance videos, and statements from victims' families. One mother described her daughter get thrown into a table like a rag doll. Another man recalled the wet snapping sound as someone's body was crushed behind them. Medical examiners testified to the scale of destruction to the human bodies, describing organs quote-unquote displaced completely from the cavity and bones reduced to gravel-like fragments. Not surprising, Weller was convicted on all accounts. However, due to his age and medical condition, he was sentenced to probation and house arrest. He actually never served any jail time. In the aftermath, city officials made changes to the market's layout, heavy concrete barriers were installed, and traffic protocols were revised. Memorial plaques were placed at the site, and a yearly moment of silence was held for the victims. The incident remains one of the most catastrophic pedestrian fatalities in modern US history, not caused by terrorism or quote-unquote intentional violence.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.